And we're back with TC McCarthy to discuss U.S. government programs that deal with the paranormal. So I'll start with a program that the U.S. government had back in the kind of mid to late 70s called uh, Project Gondola Wish. And this was a program that the government, U.S. government, and again, this is all based on declassified documents that anyone can readily find on the CIA website. Just go to Google search CIA, Crest, and then you can just do a search for this piece of information and find it. But Gondola Wish was a program that looked into Soviet parapsychology and Eastern Bloc parapsychology research and experimentation because this is kind of at the height of the Cold War. At the time, I think in around 1977, when I saw some of the results of this study, the Soviet Union had a little bit over 24,000 nuclear warheads. The United States had roughly around 25.5 thousand nuclear warheads. And the following year, in 1978, for the first time in history, the Soviet Union surpassed the U.S. in total number of warheads. So it was a time of extreme paranoia where the U.S. government was willing to look at anything. And if the Soviets had been working on something since the 1960s, they were 15, 20, maybe 30 years ahead of the U.S. program, and it really freaked them out. And they decided to do a study. So they did a subsequent study. They found that Soviets, to kind of make things very, very brief, were working on had looked across a number of things. They actually looked at black magic. If you look at the kind of the Russian situation, there was a competing philosophy ever since the advent of Christianity with paganism and things like that. So like the Russian experience has uh, a lot of history with mediums and things like that. Again, I'm neither here nor there. It's just history. So the Russians looked at black magic programs. My understanding is it didn't go very far. They also looked at clairvoyance, particularly remote viewing. So clairvoyance is being able to see independent of space and time, or projecting or you're projecting your consciousness somewhere else so you can review things. They also looked at telepathy, particularly they tried to use telepathy with astronauts to communicate with not astronauts but cosmonauts. Again, I don't that it turned out based on their experience, the Russians were to some extent reacting to a rumor of the U.S. conducting a similar experiment in the 1960s with the USS Nautilus, which was a U.S. I believe nuclear submarine, or like I don't know if it was powered by a nuclear reactor or if they had nuclear ballistic missiles, but there were rumors of that. The U.S. government obviously denied them. So it could have been an attempt at misinformation in order to get the Russians all kind of wasting effort on something that the U.S. believed wasn't real, or it could have been real. I don't know. So the particular area of Russian telepathy that they were looking at was compelling or compelling people not to do things from a distance, or discouraging someone to do things at a distance. They also looked at telekinesis, and there were some Russian or Soviet celebrities that appeared to be good at just bending spoons and just weird affecting electromagnetic things, and I think that was typically on the telekinesis side where they focus, where they would try to you're not talking. It doesn't necessarily just mean moving physical objects, but it also means impacting electrical currents and things like that. And there were apparently, according to the CIA, there's a report that they put out in 1977 that did indicate that in controlled studies that there were certain abilities that you could that were replicable in controlled experience, where you could influence those sorts of things. And the CIA at the time was also very careful to try to make this study as scientific as possible, where they could use the scientific method to experiment in things, and generally ignored things that fell more into the occult, like black magic and things like that, where it was much more difficult to focus on those activities and study them. And additionally, they also focused on areas that had the most readily immediate applied use cases, particularly remote viewing and things like that. I didn't really read much in the literature about out of body experiences. I do know that the CIA and DIA had worked with Robert Monroe, who set up the Monroe Institute in Virginia, which still exists to this day, to look at that capability. I did see one piece of declassified documentation that kind of alluded to the fact that the CIA and DIA officials thought that Monroe had a unique ability and was trying to kind of cash out on that unique ability. So they, had, at one point later on, they actually did send several people to train at the facility. So it could be some attempt at disinformation, or they may have believed that at some point. I don't know. So that was kind of what this kind of Project Gondola wish in the course of doing that study gave the U.S. intelligence community enough empirical data that they decided that they needed to at least invest in a scientific analysis of the program. Oh, the other thing that they noticed that was increasingly alarming is in the 1960s there was a lot of open publication and scientific study of these phenomena. That said, there was also a lot of noise. There was a lot of pseudoscience and charlatanism, a lot of fake mediums and things like that. But what they did notice is that over time, the Soviet military intelligence apparatus started to increasingly shift funding into classified programs and discourage publication or the widespread publication of open source research that had hitherto been conducted up until the 1960s. I mean, there's still some, but it's definitely clear the Russians were trying to clamp down on this information getting out. And again, maintaining a skeptic's view, it could have also been a very broad and well executed attempt at disinformation to get the U.S. to invest resources in something that did not work. I don't know the answer. I just know that these documents do exist. So as a result of this, the United States started a program or a series of several programs, ranging from Grill Flame, Sunstreak, Center Lane, and then ultimately, I think the last program that was at least declassified was what most people have commonly heard of, which is Stargate. And based on what's been declassified, most of the effort was on a technique called remote viewing, which is not necessarily it's not an out of body sort of experience, but it is a way to sit down while you're still conscious and project your consciousness to a target, and then you can describe the target. It's a bit like if you were kind of go back into the medieval times. It's like what they would call scrying, right? And there were some people who were remarkably good at these things. So there were government contractors who were involved. One of the contractors was the Stanford Research Institute, which is still exists today. It's a government defense contractor located in Palo Alto, California, near Stanford, obviously. And there was a remote viewing protocol that they established there that the CIA reviewed. During one of the tests, the CIA had given, and when you give someone a target, you generally give them a series of coordinates. You put it in an envelope, and you tell them to review, so the remote viewer doesn't know where they're going or what they're reviewing. And all they do is kind of describe what they're seeing. And the first target, or one of the targets the CIA gave them to vet this process, was a cabin, but that cabin was near an extremely high classified facility in West Virginia. And according to folks at the Stanford Research Institute, who or at least or SRI, there was a very talented remote viewer. His name was Pat Price, who, according to these remote viewers, in the psychic realm, the more you try to hide something, the more it lights up in psychic space. So while this while Pat Price was looking for this target, which was a cabin on the edge, near the edge of this highly classified facility, he drifted to the highly classified facility and was able to name individual file folders like cue ball and um, things that he had. There was no way for him to know through any possible conventional means, particularly at that time. It freaked out. It absolutely freaked out the CIA because he wasn't supposed to look at those targets, um, and it also, he subsequently died at some point of congestive heart failure. I believe of kind of quote unquote natural causes, but there's reason to believe that may or may not have been. He was actually concerned that he knew a little bit too much. And the other thing that they discovered about this, and they may have found a way to get around it since, but there's absolutely no way to defend. If you're trying to protect secrets, there's no way to defend yourself against these techniques. So, which is a reason for when the CIA finally took over the program in 1996, they did a very detailed, well, they did a very comprehensive study of it and concluded that it, was not effective at all, not, not useful, and they kind of subsequently buried it. Now, it's possible that's absolutely the case. It's also possible that the last thing you want is every citizen of the world know that most humans have this capacity to use this, and can't really keep secrets very well anymore. So anyway, that's a very broad introduction to these programs. And again, don't believe a word I'm saying. Just take a look at these declassified documents. Just do a search for Project Stargate, and you will find the original documents. You'll find budgets. You'll find a number of people who have been employed in these programs, and there are also alumni who claim to have operated in these spaces, who've written books on how to do that. Joe McMonagle's is one example. So TC.
Well, yeah, I'll add, if I can add a couple more things to that. Um, I think a lot of people, when they encounter this topic for the first time, think, "Oh, what a load of crap."
Yeah.
But there you really have to consider the fact that some valid scientific research has been done in this area at Duke University.
And Princeton,
You
Pearl.
mentioned Stanford. I wasn't aware of
Pear.
Princeton.
It's because it's called Pear. And they had done empirical studies. It demonstrated that, from a statistical standpoint, the p value, they exceeded the p
It's
value.
better than chance. It's better than chance
Yeah,
when
it's
you look at those
statistically
kinds of
significant. They
controlled
identified it significant.
experiments.
And there was
And
there were uh, Nobel laureates working on this program, and they shut it down in 2007. So it was relatively recent.
so people get uncomfortable about this topic, but I take the position of this is not up for debate. There's something related to what we can do with our minds that has influence over certain circumstances that clearly they have that influence. There's something going on. We might not understand it. I'll add one other thing. At University of Virginia, they have a paranormal research institute that still is around today, a proper university facility. Professors in psychiatry are associated with it. They've done decades and decades of research on past lives and reincarnation, and have controlled. Well, maybe not controlled is the right word, but they have meticulously and painstakingly documented cases where young children are remembering events that did not happen during their lifetime. events that actually happened previously to their being born. So there is plenty of evidence to suggest that something's going on, and that we shouldn't just, have the reaction that I already said, which is, oh, what a bunch of crap. No, it's not a bunch of crap. There's something going on.
Yeah, but we should at the same point though. We shouldn't accept everything we see as true.
No.
Like that.
And
Otherwise,
look, better than chance, that might not cut it when you're trying to determine how many missiles the at the time Soviet Union had, right? Like,
yeah, and to be clear, as you well know, right, you're never going to send troops into harm's way unless you have multiple corroborating
mhm,
intel to confirm it. So, and the
yeah,
problem with remote viewing is there's a certain, like, the way that we're all trained to think, particularly in the United States, it's highly analytical. We were constantly analyzing and trying to answer, like, well, why is this? Well, so we're constantly trying to find explanations behind certain things that we see. And when you do
we are.
remote and when you do remote viewing, you have to keep yourself open because you might see something you've never seen before. I mean, to give you an example, right? Um, let's say that somebody in ancient Rome saw what the pilots did in the USS Nimitz, right? How would they describe it? Well, they wouldn't exactly have the language or the experience to describe it as, an extraterrestrial or even an interdimensional being. They wouldn't understand that. But it could be, a flying chariot, right? It
Yeah,
could be,
yeah, a
um,
god.
yeah. So we might not even. So the issue is when you go through remote viewing, you're just seeing images, smelling things. You're experiencing something that you might not be able to describe. So you put an analytical overlay on it that might corrupt what you're seeing, which is one reason why. Uh, I think it's about like 60% accurate, right? And I'll tell you what, the best stock pickers in the world are 60% accurate.
Well, the other thing I'll mention too is that we are, as Westerners, we're very different from the Russians. We and our religions, especially if you're Christian, are very much kind of, we've been really stewed in the Socratic method,
Mm-hmm.
in the whole Greek philosophy that gave birth to the scientific method. That you're getting back to your whole thing of, we're analytic, right? We've got to have a framework to understand these things. The Russians are much more receptive to kind of the more spiritualistic explanations. They were not, the Eastern Orthodox Church was not married to that same kind of philosophy and methodology. So, you and I have talked about this. I met Joe McMoneagle.
So tell
Should
me
I
about.
should I tell that story?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's on you, brother. It's on you.
So, I forgot what it's called, but I was
Monroe
back in
Institute.
my yeah, back when I was a young man, and I'm old now. I was in a relationship with somebody whose mother was very connected to the Monroe Institute, and she gave me as a gift um, a chance to go to the program where it's kind of like the first step. I forgot what it's called, like the pilot program or whatever, where you go, and the whole goal is through meditation, through the use of sound and frequencies, um,
Hemisync, right? Hemisync.
hemisync. Yeah, the goal is to have an out of body experience. And excuse me, I'm drinking seltzer water, and it's anyway. Um,
You don't want it
the
coming out of your nose. I get it.
yeah, the the interesting part, for me, the most interesting part of that was, well, a couple of things. Let me give some atmosphere. The Monroe Institute, when you go there, when I was there, I don't know what it's like today. It was a very 1960s, 70s vibe, right? Like the building itself, and which shouldn't surprise anybody. And, you really ought, as soon as you get there, you're shut off from the rest of society. You don't have, back then we didn't have cell phones, but I imagine they would take them from you today. You didn't have access to phones at all, didn't have access to your car, nothing, shut off and completely isolated with another group of individuals, with a group of individuals. There may be about 8 of us, 8 or 9 of us. And you eat together, you meditate together. When you're not doing those things together and you're sleeping, you don't really sleep. They put you in this cubicle, which is almost like an isolation tank, but not quite. But it's got like, draperies, total darkness. You've got headphones on, listening to hemisync stuff. And very quickly, you start to feel like things are really weird, right? And then one night, there was a session on remote viewing, and Joe McMoneagle came in. And so we're in this classroom, and Joe McMoneagle at the time, he was getting up there. He was a Vietnam vet. Um, he would go through his training sequence, but in addition to that, he kind of told little of his history and how he developed what he believed were psychic capabilities. And I think that he experienced stuff in his childhood. But one of the things that people don't mention, or maybe they're not aware of, is, I could be wrong, but this is how I remember it. I believe his experiences in the Vietnam War also played a role in bringing something out in terms of his capabilities. And so he was very much an advocate of this concept that trauma, major trauma, can have an effect on somebody's mentality or psyche, to the point where suddenly, there's the before event and then an after event, and after, you've got some sort of increased ability to either remote view or be telepathic or whatever. So I can't remember his training regime, but he sat us all down and he gave us a piece of paper, and he had something in an envelope up at the front of the classroom, coordinates or a name of a city, I think in this case. Mm-hmm. And he asked us to go ahead and start doing certain things and drawing as we did them. And I got it completely wrong. I didn't even get close. I was completely wrong. But others in the class did. And afterward, I went and had a talk with him. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to get too involved in this story, but as a result,
I want you to get involved. This is interesting.
Well, the personal side of it, I don't want to get involved with, but I will say this. After talking to Joe, after being at the Monroe Institute for however many days I was there at that point, it was very clear to me that the woman I was involved with at the time, that I shouldn't be in that relationship for a number of different reasons that I could not see prior to going here. But while I was at the Monroe Institute, I got a very clear picture of what was going on, let's just say when I wasn't around. And it was very upsetting. I talked to Joe about it, and he was like, look, man, I talked to him a bit about my past, and he said, it's very possible that you remind me of me. It's very possible that what you're seeing is real. And it turns out it was. At the time, I was so bothered by it, I couldn't stay. And the people who ran the Monroe Institute did not want me to leave because it would ruin the group dynamic, right? But I was basically like, you motherfuckers, you better give me my car keys. Sorry, I don't know if I could swear on your program. You better give me my car keys.
You bring out the swearing in me. I think you're the only podcast where I started swearing. So thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, TC. Thanks. You bring out the best.
You better give me my car keys. I'm getting out of here. I need to use the phone, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't know it at the time. It was after I got picked up. That's when I found out that everything I'd been thinking was true. My worst nightmare at the time. And it was awful. It was an awful period of my life. But man, something happened there. I can't explain it.
What gave you these feel like? Were they thoughts, images?
So conversations, images, all sorts of things that I had not put together, all of a sudden came together in this cohesive picture of holy shit, this is going on. This is happening.
So some people, you say thoughts and conversations, are these? So I'm trying to separate the analytical from the paranormal, right?
So, right. I don't know that you can in this case. I could easily see somebody saying, Oh, well, those things were already there in your subconscious from conversations you had had with this girl,
Right, right.
from things you'd observed. And,
But when I say
maybe the
images,
meditation.
when I say images, are these memories or are these just images?
No, these are images of a location and a place where I saw something going on.
And was that
Um,
place consistent with what you subsequently found out?
oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And of all places, it happened to be Russia.
It always comes back to you. Always got to bring it back to Russia.
Yeah, those
You got to learn to bring it
fuckers.
back to China.
I know.
That's the new way. That's the new way.
Yep. But so anyway, um, I have Monroe Institute to thank for that. We were young. It
Well,
was
you were
it
about to
was a
get married. You
mistake
were
on
about to
both
get married to
sides.
this woman, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And probably not a good idea for either of us, if I'm being brutally honest. But I it was an experience I'll never forget for a number of different reasons. But first and foremost, of how the hell did that happen? How did all of a sudden all this disparate stuff come together at that moment? And I have this awakening of just monumental proportions for me at the time, anyway. So that's my story.
So, what do you think all this means?
Well, I'm never going back to the Monroe Institute. Um,
Really? You wouldn't?
I recommend it, but it's not like that was a good experience for me, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like a kid who eats pizza and then winds up getting sick and hates pizza from then on out, right? Like that's how it is for me. Nothing. I don't have anything to say, oh, you shouldn't go to the Monroe
Yeah,
Institute
you're
because
worried you'll
X,
have
Y, and
another
Z.
negative experience
Yeah,
based on what they're
I
teaching
don't
you
want
how
to
to do.
know. Yeah,
Right.
I don't want to know. But I think that is a good lesson to take away. Um, if this is real, it's not like it's always going to give you good experiences. You know,
Right.
I don't know what it means. Maybe we're in a simulation. Um, that's entirely possible. Uh,
Or
maybe
maybe
it
life,
means God's real.
maybe life is a look. I've read a lot of stuff, and again, I don't. People who experience these things, they when you ask them if they believe, they say no, right? And then they'll respond, "I know." I don't know, right? I've never
Right.
had, at least with my own memory, right? I don't remember. I've never experienced anything you would possibly classify as a parent. Like the strangest thing that's ever happened to me was like a raven like landed on my. I have weird like stuff happening with animals, right? Um, but that could just be coincidental and random, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's if I'm like trying to find something. That's what I would say. But again, it's more likely coincidental than anything like that. But where was I going with this?
You said you started off with people who have these experiences say, I don't think I know.
Yeah, so if you kind of review a lot of these experiences, if you read like Robert Monroe's books, like Journey Out of the Body and things like that, you learn like you read about near death experiences and things like that. Now they could all be aping each other and copying each other, right? But if I if I was to put my conspiracy theory hat on hat on, and kind of crowdsource all this stuff. Again, I have not personally experienced it. I don't believe this, right? I don't know. But if I put an analytical hat on and couple all these experiences, the narrative that seems to emerge over and over again is that we talked in a previous example about we're called containers, right? So there is a narrative that suggests that um, kind of in meat space is a thing, right? It is a very limited um, viewpoint that we have because we don't just the cranial capacity we have is just not enough to encompass the full breadth of what reality really is. There's also an element of forgetting, right? So if we were all living in a simulation and we knew it was a simulation, and you're having a really bad year, just kill yourself. Just do something.
Yeah.
Get another. Right? It's like when you ever play Dungeons and Dragons when you're a kid.
Yeah. Get a new character.
Yeah, and you just keep rolling dice until you have the best
Yeah.
character. So what I think is, not what I think, but what I think this narrative, the particular narrative seems to suggest is that um, a lifespan is something where a a much you have very limited perception, which is limited by meat space. There's a bit of forgetting, so you don't see the full piece of reality, and you're here to learn certain lessons. In all these experiences, there's kind of an element of timelessness. So there's these life audits, right, where when you die, people report going through kind of all the bad they put out in the world, and then seeing the ripple effect and experiencing the
Yep.
emotions of all the bad things and the good things that they did.
You're talking
Um,
about life after death.
yeah, yeah. Well, these life
Yeah.
audits of people that come back, right?
Yeah.
But it's enough that like you couldn't do it with time constraints, right? So time might be an artifice. And the other thing that I've heard incidentally as well is that you may know, like, there may be an element of predestination, right? And again, I'm a Catholic, right? I'm not a, but we might not know what happens, but going into it, you kind of know that there's going to be some key events that you experience, and um, that will help
Some
you.
people would even say you choose
Right? No, no,
the
that's exactly
life
that's
you're
exactly
going into.
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. But the whole point of it all is to learn
Yeah.
and to evolve and to raise your consciousness to a new level. Now, I'm speaking as if I believe this, right? And I don't know what to believe. I want to be very clear. I think there's something to it. I also think that if physics says energy is neither created nor destroyed, right? So I'm not a believer that your energy just fades away when you die, right? I think there is something beyond, um, and what these near death experiences seem to point is that the consciousness and awareness is so much more expansive outside of this kind of meat space, because you're not confined into four dimensions of three is space, one of time. You're kind of beyond that. But I don't know. Like, the best books to read about all this stuff are kind of the three Monroe books, which are absolutely fascinating. But you can't. This is one of those things that's not. It's not. You just have to. Some people just feel like they know it because they've
Right.
experienced it. I've never
Right.
experienced it, so I don't know. I don't know.
Even with my experience, I doubt, you know, I can't, the analytic part of me, I can't shake it. The scientific training, I can't shake it.
Yeah, but
And,
I even
and I,
I even think there's probably a scientific basis for all this. It's just we don't
yes.
we
Yeah.
can't detect the fields yet that somebody would describe as psychic fields, or even reality. Like, we don't have the sensors. Same thing, like we see the effects of gravity, but we still don't really, and we know that it's caused by waves, but we have to go through a ton of experimentation to truly
The,
verify that it exists.
the empirical evidence is there. Let's just
But the
talk
mechanism
about,
is not. But the mechanism.
right. The theory is lacking. There's 100 different theories, 1,000, a million. But the empirical evidence is there, I would say, and have said earlier when we were talking, that that there is some basis scientifically to what you're talking about right now. Coming here to learn, forgetting, choosing your life. In some cases, the forgetting breaks, and you get these people who remember as children the life they had before, right? And reincarnation is not. You mentioned you're Catholic. I'm Catholic. That's a no-no. Catholics don't get reincarnated, right? Well, they do.
Same thing with talking to
you know,
like dead relatives and things like that. Like that's
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting when you start talking about faith and different views on these things. The life after death experiences of Buddhists are different from Christians. But there are also some common elements between the life after death experiences. And one of the ones that I'm most fascinated by that you've already mentioned is that life review, that you don't just, from what I've understand, in most cases anyway, you don't just review what happened, you feel from the other person's perspective.
And several people down the line based on the ripple effect.
Yeah,
And often
what
it's not
you,
stuff that you remember doing,
oh, and you
right?
feel that awfulness of a simple word and the pain it can cause, and I don't know if I want to go through that.
Well, there's also the positive side too.
Yeah, the good things you do, for sure.
But even like even knowing or even seeing other people report to have experienced that has started to change my own behavior.
Yeah,
Right? It's like,
yeah,
well, I'm taking kind of the Pascal's wager sort of like, well, what if it is true?
right. Better to
I
bet
might
on
as
the
well,
side
I
of
might as
it.
well. It's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt me. It's not
Right.
going to hurt anybody in my life. In fact, it'll help people if I am quicker to forgive. If I
Yeah,
and I tell you what, like that's hard. Like I'm not a forgiving. Like on loyalty and integrity matters, I don't forgive. I'll
yeah.
forgive
No,
just
it's
about
tough.
everything else. Just about everything else, but like, um, yeah. But at the end of the day, though, there's things that you might think you harmed somebody in a certain way, but it turns out that it doesn't even show up. Like it's not even part of it. It'll be some little thing that you had no idea that just causes deep, enormous pain, or you may have changed somebody's life,
Yeah,
right? And it had a positive ripple effect, and you thought it was a small thing, or don't even remember doing it.
yeah.
So anyway, I don't. Again, I have not experienced anything like this. I am like, I think if I had like a psychic IQ and like the average IQ was like 100, I would be at like 20, right? I just
No,
have
but
no.
it's I think that everything we're talking about here though is a very hopeful message. It's a positive
Yeah,
message. Um, and I would encourage people to come to the same conclusion you did, which is um, bet on the side of there's something more to life than the material.
yeah. Bet on
Um,
goodness.
yeah, yeah,
Bet on the good intentions of people. Don't commit the
yep.
fundamental attribution error where you assume that you attribute to malice what is really just
Stupidity.
dumbfuckery was the word I was going to use.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's a better word.
so it's just it's I don't know. Again, I have no experience with this, but if the conclusion is to live a good and positive life, you ought to endeavor to live a good and positive life. And if you kind of wink out of existence after you die, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
All right, TC. With that, um,
That's a good note to end it on.
yeah, I appreciate your time, and we'll get you back because we need to talk about your books and things
Yeah,
with Bain. But I think you and I
definitely.
just couldn't resist talking about this stuff for like.
I'm a fan of it. I'm a fan. It's
Well,
like
it's fascinating. Look, I'm fascinated by it.
I can spend hours.
And I just I don't I'm like there's a huge element of doubt, but there's a huge element of doubt for me in every aspect as a
Yeah.
Catholic um
Well, as a Catholic, I think you and I have discussed this. I would recommend starting to look at some of the prophecies and the prophets that the Catholic Church has accepted, like the Fatima seers. You know what I'm talking about? Have we talked about that?
I think so. Yeah, they're like the three prophecies and
Yeah, yeah, I find that stuff fascinating too. It's amazing when you've got witnesses to an event, 30,000 plus witnesses in 1917,
do you think that was
in a
it
field.
was a dancing sun, but was that a UFO or do you think it was a dancing like
Right. And what was that? I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because you'd know, like astronomers would notice that the sun was moving, right?
it. Then that's an interesting point. There's clearly, when you get outside of a certain radius of that area, people didn't see anything.
Yeah.
It was only the people in that area that saw this.
So what
And
would the
so
ultimate skeptic debunker say about it? Would be something about mass hysteria, but what would they?
mass hysteria and stuff like that. Yeah. Um, but it kind of, those types of things now, having the breadth of all the things we've discussed, right? I no longer look at that as a spiritual event necessarily. It could be, but I have to now look at it holistically in the context of things we've discussed, like Skinwalker Ranch,
Right.
the UAP phenomenon, everything.
Well, even looking at it from a scientific standpoint, if you have a civilization that's a million years more advanced than you in either dimensional space or I don't know if dimensional is probably a good terminology for it, but reality space, let's call it,
Right.
or even like outer space, or what have you. If they're a million years more advanced, they would have discovered different, again, the unified field theory. Like Einstein was
Yeah.
never able to come up with one, like a single unified field theory to describe it. How the four forces, at least the four forces that we know of, which is the weak nuclear force, strong nuclear force, gravitational force, and then electromagnetism. For all we
Yep.
know, there may be other fields and forces that we just have not been able to detect,
Yeah.
understand, or know, and these civilizations may have found a way to exploit these fields. So talk about higher dimensions of consciousness and things like that. And maybe their technologies reasons that if these things if you believe the kind of the Bob Lazar thing, the reason you may not be able to fully understand these things could be simple reasons. We just don't have the metallurgical know-how yet to figure them out, with the technological know-how. But there also might be some element of consciousness
Yeah.
that helps, that we just don't quite understand.
It's required. Yeah.
Yeah, or fields, even just other particles that we aren't aware that exist that um, you know affect something on the world.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, it was a pleasure, TC.
Definitely,
Look forward
Sean.
to
Thanks for
talking to
having
you
me. I
soon.
appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
I wonder. We'll see how this thing goes. I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.